Every year, millions of Americans are exposed to a contagious virus.
What is this virus? It's stigma.
Stigma promotes an environment of shame,
fear, and silence.
Which prevents millions of people from seeking help.
But there's good news.
The National Alliance on Mental Illness believes stigma towards mental illness is 100% curable.
So do yourself and everyone a favor.
Go to curestigma.org and get tested for stigma.
Good morning and welcome to Access Spotlight. I'm your host, Ray Maestro. Today we will be discussing the current state of mental health in America. Millions of Americans are affected by some type of mental illness. Recent studies reveal that 1 in 5 U.S. adults experience mental illness each year. 1 in 5 U.S. youth aged 6 through 17 experience a mental health disorder each year as well. 50% of those do not seek treatment because of stigma. Suicide is the second leading cause of death among people aged 10 through 34. Today with us to give us more insight into this topic is Ellen Ritz, board member of NAMI, Queens, Nassau. NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, is the nation's largest grassroots mental health organization dedicated to building better lives for millions of Americans affected by mental illness. Welcome, Ellen, and thank you for being with us here today.
Thank you. I'm glad you're having me. May I add something?
Sure.
That our mission, NAMI's mission, is to support, educate, and advocate for people struggling with a mental health disorder and their families, as well as very important people such as teachers, faith leaders, medical staff, anybody who can have a tremendous influence on people who are struggling in their families, as well as the public. Very important also is to advocate, because the second part is to get help, and whether it be through hospitalization or rehabilitation or housing, is advocating to our legislators to give us more money to support the things that people who are struggling need. And that's, we're multi-pronged and we're working on all of that.
Okay. And what would you say is one of the best ways to raise awareness of mental health disorders and help?
Well, certainly by talking to different groups. We do it in a bigger way as well as a smaller way. We have programs and classes for families and people who are struggling, educating the families and supporting them as well as the people who are struggling is really important, because who do we see ourselves in? Our family's eyes, right? And so when a family can't fix and they can't control anybody else but themselves, so when they learn how they can change their behavior and they understand what their person they love is struggling, they can then change their behavior to support in a way that's helpful. And that's really what our goal is. We have 12-session classes. All of our programs and classes are free. And we also have a FaithNet, a committee where we support clergy and faith leaders of all kinds, because who do you turn to when you have faith, when you're in crisis? Is certainly the faith leaders. Also teachers, colleges, high schools, all the places where, you know, people are struggling, and that we can change the knowledge and how to support, and understanding what a mental health disorder is about. It's a medical illness, it's not a character flaw, and it's not something that someone did or didn't do to you. Particularly families feel that way, except for PTSD, which is totally environmental. And that's really very important, to change the stigma. And that's how we change stigma. Understanding it's just like any other medical illness, like diabetes, asthma, thyroid problems. You need medication for the imbalance many times, but certainly in psychiatry you need support therapy to figure out how to deal with your stresses. It's very important. Those are the two basic things.
Right. And so the information and help is accessible to all age groups, correct?
Yes. We really do focus on when mental health disorders end up, unfortunately, coming out is teens, late teens and 20s and 30s in particular. But for all age groups beyond that, yes.
Okay, and then your particular office covers the Queens-Nassau area, correct?
Yes, we do Queens-Nassau. I'm also on the New York State Board, so and that usually helps with supporting training and policies. All of our programs are evidence-based. That means that they have real results. We do not send people out willy-nilly. We are a volunteer organization, but we train people who are appropriate, and therefore they go out. And what that is different from professionals is that we've been there, we know how complex and hard it is, and when you talk to somebody from your heart and you really do know the information from training, but you also give that empathy to say, I know how hard it is, but it can be done. And there is hope for everybody.
Right, it's very important. And what would you say are some popular mental health disorders that you see day to day?
Well, so mental health disorders are usually diagnosed when you're not enjoying life and when stopping you from either moving forward, studying, your job, whatever it may be, and then you go, usually, hopefully, will seek for help rather than sitting there and really struggling and pulling back. Some of the first warning signs are change in not only studies or in grades for young people, and not being able to continue at work. And also pulling back, changing your socialization, because when you're struggling with what's going on in your head, the confusion, the ability or lack of focus is usually what stops you and starts pulling back from socializing. And so that's really the beginning that we notice. And could you repeat the question again? I may have gotten off it a little bit.
No. Just some examples of mental health disorders that you see.
So some of them, usually psychosis is one that where you have, it's your thoughts. It's a covering over trauma with your thoughts, your delusions. They're not coming from outer space. They are coming from your experience. Psychosis is part of schizophrenia. It could be part of the manic, of bipolar. And it also could be part of depression. But most frequently it's thought of with schizophrenia, but it is also part of the manic, the high for bipolar. We also see a lot of depression and anxiety. I think anxiety go hands in hand with any disorder. And so when people say, I have depression and anxiety or bipolar and anxiety, I think everybody has a bit of anxiety in this day and age with social media and with all the things that are going on. And that's why you see the results of self-medication as well as, unfortunately, epidemic of suicide.
Right. Suicide is a continuing problem. Would you say that it's on the increase? Is it on the rise? Or?
Yes, I think suicide has increased, and I'm hoping. I think social media is part of that. You say, "Oh, good, I have a way out." I don't think it's, "Oh, good, I have a way out," but it's that you're in such pain, you feel alone, helpless, and hopeless, and that you feel that you're in this valley, you'll never get out. And that's when a thought possibly of suicide. And what they say to do is, if you have this gut feeling that someone's giving away precious possessions, or they're going to say things like, "You're not going to have to worry about me." Not everybody gives out hints or invitations, what they call it in the American Suicide Prevention. But if you have that gut feeling, always ask directly, because you cannot put that in somebody's mind, but you can be saying, "I hear you, I see you, you're not alone," if they really are thinking that. And you can't do any harm by asking it directly. And how wonderful to save a life, possibly. But I need to add that you cannot control somebody's behavior. And if they're determined and they do not give out invitations, and even if you did ask them directly, please do not feel guilty. Do not feel that you could have controlled that. You cannot control somebody else's behavior. And how sad is that this happens, but you need to know that you could not have done anything more.
Is there a particular age group that is more susceptible to suicide? Or is it various ages?
You see, well, what happens is the brain is really not mature until between 25 and more towards 30. And the impulse control and all these other things, I think, contribute to teenagers' feeling of, particularly teenagers or even 20s, where I think if people had less stigma and more understanding, they could get help. So the depression of this young group really leads to this feeling of being alone. I think if families, and that's really one of our prongs, is having families or teaching families how they can support somebody, how they, instead of criticism and judgment, being there, you know, and supporting them to get the help, but not doing things for them, because families feel they can fix it, they can't. But by saying to your loved one, I know you're going to figure this out, and I'm here to help you. You ask me how I can help you, and I love you, and I will be there for you.
So what would you say is an example of a way to help somebody that's thinking of committing suicide?
Well, if you know that, definitely you would, if they don't answer you not directly, and in any way you think they are, you need to get them into the hospital. You call either the mobile crisis or 911. When you call those numbers, particularly 911, you need to say, my loved one is either has a diagnosis and has a mental health disorder and is thinking of killing themselves. There are no weapons. You make sure you say there are no weapons, they are not dangerous. You need to help me get him to the hospital or her to the hospital, whoever that person is. But those are very important things to say. They're safe, there's no weapons, because people come in, you don't want guns blazing because they're afraid. And sometimes if someone's in delusions and yet suicidal, you need to make sure that whoever's coming knows that information. That they're not just somebody who the media unfortunately has said anybody who has shot up someplace, causes destruction, has mental illness, and that's what they use. This person has mentally ill. It's not true most of the time. There are sometimes they do have a mental health disorder, but many times they're just angry people. And I just want to make the point, people with mental health disorders are more likely to be victims than perpetrators. And that's a really important point to make, are more likely to be victims than perpetrators.
Right, that's very important.
And I think some of that, I apologize, but some of the media has made it more difficult and increase stigma and made it more difficult for people to want to get help. Again, as you see it as a medical illness, it's not a character flaw. Why not get help? It's something that is so much hope once you get help.
Right. And what would you say? Would you say that everybody that thinks they might have something, or some people might not know that they have some, do you think most people go for help? Do you think most people ask for help, or more people should be going for help?
I think most people, I wouldn't say most, it's hard to say most, but a lot of people do not go for help because they feel, I don't want people to think I'm crazy, particularly when I speak in high schools or colleges. People say, so if you have a mental health disorder, if you have depression or any of the other diagnoses, there's a lot of anxiety disorders, OCD, eating disorders. Why wouldn't you get help? I don't want people to think I'm crazy. And that's what the typical answer is. I don't want people to make fun of me. Isn't that sad? But I said, well, so would you not get help if you had diabetes or thyroid? Oh, of course we would. So you see the differences in the psychiatric versus the medical illnesses. And again, psychiatric illnesses are medical illnesses. They are an imbalance in the brain, the biology, chemistries, and neurology. And they can be put back into order.
Now, do you think that a person might not know that they have something? They might not know that they're suffering from something?
I like that question, because a lot of families come to me and they say, oh, my loved one says they deny that they're ill. Right. I don't believe that. I believe everybody knows that they're struggling. Whether they want to share it or not is up to them. The point is we want to support them and get them help. They don't have to admit, and my philosophy is, particularly as you look at the principles of support, that as you see the person as an individual, it changes how they see themselves. When you treat someone as ill, they will stay ill. When you support them and say, and not just ask, how did you sleep, did you take your medication, or whatever it is, it gives them hope that they're worth something. Criticism and judgment in any relationship do not belong, because it keeps someone feeling broken. And when they're struggling and they even don't admit it, they feel broken. Just like in a math class, everybody gets the answer but me. Oh my God, am I stupid? And that's the kind of thoughts that people have. And it's sad, because everybody has wonderful areas of strengths, and when you play to those strengths, people feel worthwhile and that they can go on. And there is hope in that situation.
It's important, even if you think there's something, to seek help, talk to somebody, get information. Raise awareness is the most important thing. We want to raise awareness of mental health disorders, where to get information, to get help, to talk. Talk helps. Therapy.
wonderful. It's wonderful. Therapy is really important, how to deal with the stresses that we have. We all have stress in life, and resilience and coping comes from dealing with the stress in a way that's helpful, even if it's pulling back and saying, I need a day off, which I know schools are saying now you can have mental health days. Hopefully that will be utilized as as a good thing. But to recognize, okay, so I need to be good to myself. I need to stay in the moment. And mindfulness is being in the present. And when you're in the present, for everybody, including families who are struggling, for all of us, it doesn't have to be anybody struggling, it relieves us thinking about shoulda, coulda, what am I going to do? And it changes your immune system. When we're constantly stressed, our immune system gets weaker. And when we stay in the moment and rests our brain, the chemicals and our immune system gets stronger. And even if it's just for a little while, a few times a week, how wonderful. And it's not feeling guilty that I'm taking care of myself. It's actually a good thing, so you can take care of others and you can go forward in a way that's helpful.
Some of the audience, they'd like to know, what is a good age to start talking and teaching about mental health disorders? Particular age?
Well, I personally think that hopefully, if you have a history in your family, you may want to talk earlier, but it's how you model. And I say to families, when you have other siblings or somebody else in the family, and if you're talking about your spouse or your sibling or your parent or child, remember, how you talk about them struggling will actually change, good or bad, how somebody else may treat somebody else. Let's say if you have a spouse who's struggling. Well, as your children grow up, and if you're very negative, these children who may have children of their own or may become that person struggling will see themselves negatively. So when you talk about that there's hope, and I understand that this is not a character flaw or the person's doing purposely, but they have an illness that we're going to take care of, and then there's always hope that they will figure out how to go forward and help themselves with our help and support and love, unconditional.
And can we talk about some of the NAMI principles of support?
I would love that. So, I love lots of things here.
Okay.
So one of the things is, I will read some of them. We see the individual first, not the illness, and that's for me is huge because it changes how that person sees themselves. And when you see the positives in a person, see the best in someone, and they will be their best. And so our words, the family's words and attitudes are the most important thing in your family's lives. And so when we are conscious of saying words like, oh, he's crazy, or speaking about somebody on TV that you see negatively, it really changes how people in your family see themselves as well. But also by noticing, let's talk about baseball or football or what a great day it is. I guess you don't really want to always talk about politics because that could be very, very triggering. But certainly talking about other things other than how you're feeling all the time. And I think that changes how the person feels that they have self-worth other than just being a mental health disorder, which is only one part of you. You're a whole individual with so many more things going for you. So that challenge, and what I say to people who are struggling as well as to families, when people have the challenge of a mental health disorder, how wonderful. When they start meeting that challenge and figuring it out, it makes them stronger. It makes them stronger than other people who may not have that challenge. And how wonderful is that?
Yeah.
And that's, as again, remember I say challenge because we all have challenges, and a mental health disorder is just one of the challenges. And meeting it is really a wonderful strength. So figuring that out. Okay, so we recognize disorders are medical illnesses. They do have environmental triggers. They are traumatic. Mental health disorders are traumatic events. And we do talk about an emotional stages chart, which is I'm just going to go off a little bit for that. A mental health emotional stages chart is really what happens. It's Kubler-Ross also. Stages of when a trauma happens. And the trauma isn't mental health disorders always. It is also death, divorce, loss of jobs, but they're absolute regular reactions that everybody who suffers a trauma or has a trauma goes through. The first is disbelief, I can't believe this happened, to anger, to bargaining if you're religious, please, I'll be good if you take this away, to sadness, and sadness is letting go of sometimes what was and saying I'm going to deal with what is, and that leads to recovery. And those stages take at different times, and everybody in the family goes through that when there's a trauma. Everybody, but they all go through it at different rates. And understanding that our feelings and emotions going through that are okay, you go through it in a better way. And understanding that two parents could be at different stages with that, and be kind to each other, because it sometimes changes your conversation. And so, you know, as again, education will help. Aiming for better coping skills, I think that's a lifetime. I think we all aim every day for better coping skills. You know, strength in sharing is our support group. Reject stigma and do not tolerate discrimination. That's huge. And very important, we won't judge anybody else's pain as less than ours. Another huge one, we forgive ourselves and reject guilt. How would we know if nobody ever told us? So rejecting guilt is huge. I always say, whatever happened, learn from the past. Do not, you know, and if you can't learn from it, then let it go. Let's talk about doing it present and going forward of what we can do differently or maybe learn differently so that we can go forward in a more helpful way. We embrace humor. That's one of my favorites. Mm-hmm. And I could show you my doggy picture.
Oh yeah, I was going to ask you about
my
that.
Doggy picture. I don't know if you can see it, but it says, a cute reminder to help you when you're about to judge how someone is reacting to something you think is no big deal. How deep is the mud? Depends on who you ask. There's a tall dog with mud on the bottom paws, and there's a short dog with mud all over his bottom of his body. We all go through the same stuff differently. Compliments of my daughter. And I love this because it really does remind us not to judge, and we all see things differently and have different experiences, even if they're in the same family. I mean, you can ask siblings a same incident, they all give you different responses and recognitions of them. So that's also part of humor. Really important. We must accept that we cannot solve all problems. To understand what things that you can affect and things that you can't. One thing that you can't change or control is another person. We can change how we react, how we behave, and what we say and do. And by changing what we do, say, or behave, eventually, if you're consistent, changes everybody around you. And so letting go of pushing and pulling at somebody to do something that, you know, they may or may not want, the more you step back, the more you are relaxed, the more somebody will want to do something. The more you push, the more they'll push back, and that's human nature. So understanding that there are some problems, people have come and talked to me about HIPAA. I said, you're not going to be changing HIPAA. Let's talk about how we can, you know, go through that or deal with that. But, you know, so those are the kind of things that if you keep railing against something like HIPAA, or sometimes the insurance companies, which you can advocate for to change that, but by just railing against it is not helpful. By either being active or accepting that I'm going to put my energies towards something I can change. And that's really the important part. And that takes a lot of anxiety away for people who support others, because they're trying to figure out, you know, I always say to families, if you're banging your head against the wall by doing the same thing, why are you still doing it? And you're having the same results, which are not helpful. They say, oh yeah, we got to change that. So recognizing that is really helpful, and that's really what we're about. Expect a better future in a realistic way, and something like that would be if somebody goes to the hospital for the first time, a psychiatric hospital in particular, but sometimes in medical too, and they come out and they're in a place where there's no triggers, they're not in the real world, in the outside world, and they come out and they're on medication, they feel relatively stabilized, and the family goes, they're doing better. The person feels, I'm doing better. And then they come out, and I'm going to say a huge percentage, almost everybody, says, oh, I'm feeling better. In the first week, month, 3 months, they stop the medication. I'm feeling better, I don't need medication. And they don't recognize that the medication may have put them back into balance, and that's why they're feeling better. But rather than get angry at the person, to understand that's human nature, and to explain why that they felt better. Because they usually stop and don't tell anybody. And then they go back into eventually whatever the episode is that they had. So that's understanding a better future in a realistic way, to understand human nature and the course of the struggle. And we will never give up hope, and that's NAMI, and that's me. There's hope for everybody. I don't care what it is you're struggling with, and the new treatments and research, it's very exciting. So I see there's hope for everybody. And my heart and my belief is that if I can convince families there's hope in my family classes or wherever I am, they see hope and then they convince the person who's struggling because they really feel it. And there is hope, and very exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very important. You know, there's always hope. There's people out there that have issues and they've lost hope, and it's important that they get in contact with NAMI so that they can get help and get information and treatment and regain their hope, become positive. Where can the public visit you? Is there a specific website or?
Yes, NAMIQN.org is our website. We have a calendar. We have a calendar of what's going on. Again, everything is free. It's helpful if you want to come to something that you register on the calendar, because in case there's something happens and we have to cancel it or change it some way, we can reach out to you. I know people do show up, you know, and do not register, but it's rarely but occasionally we've had to change it and we can't reach those people. So that's the reason. Everything in NAMI is confidential. The information you give us does not go anywhere. We feel very strongly that you feel safe and that you feel that it stays where it is. And that's in every meeting and every support group and every class. It's a very important concept. Also, our phone number, our office number is 516-326-0797. The office is basically, the phone will be answered from 9:30 until 4 every day, and usually I get a lot of crisis calls, so they usually give me numbers, you know, give me people as well. They have them call me, and I'm glad to take helpline calls and everything else. So.
That's good to know. If the public wants to find out more information, wants support, help, anything, they should get in contact with your organization whenever they get a chance. Let's see. Talk about a couple other things here before we wrap up. Do you have anything to add?
So again, it's really important that some of the things we do, and again, we're multi-pronged. We do go up to Albany, and we would love people who want to join on any of our committees, including our advocacy, our criminal justice. Unfortunately, people who medications are difficult, and families have to understand that unlike most of the medical medications, you know, we're all individuals and all different, and to find that right fit of the medication is very difficult sometimes, and sometimes not so difficult. But for the families to understand that why they are trying to find the right medication, that the person is still struggling, and to have that empathy. So what I ask people to do is really the empathy, to develop, how can I help you? And also, a lot of times we assume why someone does or doesn't do something. I'm going to tell you, all behaviors or non-behaviors have a reason. I'm going to guarantee you, most of the time, you assume you know why, and you don't. The reasons are different. So it's always helpful when you say to someone, so what happened? So I'm giving some keys. Hopefully people will use them.
Absolutely. This is all very important information. It's been absolutely wonderful learning about this, about you yourself, your organization, and all the help that is accessible to our public, to the audience. And I want to thank you for joining us here.
Thank you.
It's been a real pleasure having you.
Thank you.
For more information about NAMI and their services, please visit www.namiqn.org. I'm Ray Maestro. Thank you so much for watching Access Spotlight.